Hi guys, it's me, Chaz HD, and welcome to qualifying day at Monza, one of the best days of the year. Qualifying at Monza is always exciting. We always get very close, great fights for pole position, and today is going to be no different. Looking at what's happened in practice so far, it is mightily close between the top 2-3 teams. Not much separating the top 4 teams in Formula 1 at the moment at Monza. Again, you can see that through the practice sessions we've had so far. And it is going to be genuinely interesting to see who in the end ends up on pole position, because it is not, by the looks of it, a guarantee as to who that is going to be. We've got McLaren and Mercedes looking pretty strong. Ferrari looking like they're in there, but maybe not as strong as Mercedes and McLaren. In terms of, contenders to get pole. Red Bull also are in there, but not looking good. Obviously, we'll get into that more so later in this build-up, why that is. But, in practice two, in practice 3, I think there was only a third of a second separating those 4 teams. And if it is that close in qualifying, it's going to be a mega qualifying session at an incredibly hot Monza circuit. It is very hot this weekend at Monza, around 33, 34 degrees degrees Celsius is what I was trying to say, which of course is the air temperature. Track temperature might end up being over 50 degrees Celsius at during qualifying, and maybe even during the race tomorrow. So that could have, of course, an effect on what happens this weekend. But yeah, really looking forward to qualifying. It's going to be close throughout the field. Midfield, of course, looking very close as usual. And yeah, looking forward to it quite a bit. Good to see you guys here, by the way. Hope you're doing well. Of course, after the last Grand Prix a week ago at Zandvoort, we had, of course, a decent race at Zandvoort. Nothing special. But here, I think we are going to get a more exciting and competitive weekend. And it's going to be decided in terms of who wins, who finishes on the podium. It's going to be decided by close margins. There's no doubt about that. But yeah, great to see you guys here. And I hope you guys, no matter what part of the world you're from, what time zone you're in, hope you're all having as best a Saturday as possible. And I hope you'll join me today in watching along and enjoying qualifying at Monza, of course. This is the final European race of the 2024 season. We do have Baku coming up in a couple of weeks, but I don't think that really counts as a European race, because I think part of the Baku city is actually in Asia. So, yeah, this is really the last European race of the season. And you have to say, the European part of the season in 2024, that maybe in the last couple years hasn't delivered, it sure has delivered this year. It has been absolutely brilliant. We've had, endless drama, great racing, great races. And let's hope that this European season really finishes off with a classic, which, again, given how close and competitive the field is, it could end up that way this weekend. But, yeah, fingers crossed, it's a great weekend. And also, before we get into this build-up, as usual, there is a poll running at the top of the live chat where I've asked you guys, who do you think will take pole position at Monza today? And your options are in that poll: Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, and Lewis Hamilton. Let me know who you think is the most likely to take pole position, or if you think it's someone else who's likely to take pole position, like Leclerc or Russell or Carlos Sainz, then post it as a comment in the chat and I'll make sure to read that out. But yeah, let's get into the build-up here to qualifying and go through the usual. And we'll start with the results of practice 2 yesterday. Again, weather conditions the same throughout the weekend, so we don't need to worry about, major differences in terms of temperature and weather. And Mercedes and McLaren were very equal in practice 2 yesterday. Mercedes doing very well in the latter part of the lap, which is why they ended up quickest ahead of McLaren, who were pretty good towards the start of the lap, but, didn't finish the lap yesterday maybe as well as maybe they will today. And then Ferrari, you can see in the third there were Carlos Sainz. Ferrari were, closely fighting with Mercedes and McLaren, but, let's say Mercedes, McLaren, and Ferrari are the top 3 teams here in qualifying. Ferrari are definitely third and on the back foot compared to Mercedes and McLaren. Going to take something, I think, quite special from one of the drivers if Ferrari are going to end up on pole position. Saying that, Ferrari have brought their last big upgrade package of the season, and I will go through it later of course in this build-up. And it is a pretty big upgrade, even though we won't see its full effect yet. We'll have to wait till Singapore in 3 weeks' time to see its full effect. Oscar Piastri fourth. Piastri, that lap time that sees him just over a tenth of a second slower than his teammate is not a true representation of how quick he was yesterday. He did make, I think, a mistake on his quickest lap, and when he actually connected up all of his best sectors, Piastri was actually capable of a lap time, I think, a tenth and a half better than what he did. So Piastri, compared to teammate Norris, looks like he's got the edge on Lando Norris, so watch out for the Australian this weekend, who has been known to be quick here at Monza. Leclerc in fifth. Would expect a bit more from him. He was, I think, a bit quicker in practice 3. But yeah, I think Leclerc we could expect a bit more. Of course, this is a place where he's always been super quick. George Russell 6th. Russell was on a different run plan in practice 2, so that's why he was so slow compared to Lewis Hamilton. Nico Hülkenberg then in P7. Not surprised that Hülkenberg and Haas are, up there, because Haas expected to be quick here. They've got the Ferrari engine, and in qualifying trim, their car is quick around most racetracks. So, yeah, not a surprise. Hülkenberg looking quick. Ricciardo up in 8th. The Racing Bulls car, very quick down the straights, and they've got the setup, I think, absolutely bang on in that Racing Bulls car. So watch out for them today. And then Aston Martin rounding out the top 10 with both cars. And then Bottas in 11th, also benefiting from the Ferrari power unit in his Sauber. Magnussen 12th, Albon 13th, and then the 2 Red Bulls of Verstappen and Perez 14th and 15th. Now, Max Verstappen yesterday, the best lap he did was, as you can see, nearly 9/10 of a second off the pace of Lewis Hamilton. Max's best lap, though, was done on the medium compound tyre. So, it wasn't the best he could have done in practice 2. But I do have to say that the gain from going onto the soft tyre compared to the medium this weekend is not actually as big as it would be if we were at Zandvoort, for example. The gain, it looked yesterday, it looked to be about 2 to 3/10 of a second if you moved from the medium compound onto a soft compound tyre. So, obviously, Verstappen, 2 or 3/10 more in the bag there for him. But even if he went 3/10 of a second quicker, as we go back to the, what the top 10 was, that still probably would have put him in, 8th, 9th place? Something like that. So, Red Bull are in some trouble. They do not look good, and Max did have some trouble on the laps where he was trying to go quick yesterday, where the Red Bull car just wasn't gripping up for him, was handling quite poorly at times, especially in the final corner, the Parabolica, where Max had quite an oversteer moment. So yeah, Max not having a great time, let's say. Red Bull looked quicker in practice 3, but Max still, I wouldn't say Max struggling, but Red Bull, not quite on the pace that I think we're expecting coming into the weekend. I mean, coming into the weekend, I was expecting Red Bull to be honest, the quickest team, even in qualifying trim. And it doesn't look like that anywhere near that. Their race pace looks a lot better, which is good to see. But of course, if they don't qualify well, it won't matter if their race pace is really good, because they won't be able to utilize it. So, yeah, not looking good at Red Bull. Really not looking good at Red Bull. Yuki Tsunoda, then 16th. He sure can do better than that. Franco Colapinto, 17th in the Williams. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is your new driver at Williams Racing, replacing Logan Sargent. Franco is a driver in Formula 2, an Argentinian driver. A driver that I've been impressed by in F2. And I think will do a decent job at Williams. And I think will definitely do better than Logan Sargent, because I think Logan just proved he was absolutely nowhere near good enough to be a Formula 1 driver. And from what I've seen so far of Colapinto, and we'll get into the sector time data from practice 2 yesterday, already lapping at probably better speed than Logan, probably would have been at, so far this weekend. So, yeah, a decent debut, I would say, so far for Colapinto. And you can see there, 0.2 of a second only away from his teammate Alex Albon after just 1 day in the car. So, yeah, I'd say that's a pretty decent effort after day one. We'll see how he does today. Wouldn't be surprised if Colapinto honestly made it in to Q2, given how quick the Williams car you would expect it to be this weekend. And then you got Gasly 18th, Ocon 19th, Alpine are going to be useless this weekend. We'll get more into the other story with Alpine/Renault, which has been going on this weekend. And then Zhou Guanyu 20th. As usual, he is always near or at the very back. But let's get into the sector time data from practice 2 yesterday, just to see where certain teams were quick, where certain teams can improve. And we'll start with the first sector, where I would say it is the least important sector at this track. As long as you don't make a noticeable mistake in this part of the track, then that's a fine first sector. But really, in the first sector, you're relying on your car's straight line speed, its efficiency down the straights, to have a good sector 1 time. And McLaren doing very well in that aspect. You may remember, of course, last year and years before, McLaren had a bit of drag on their car, which meant they weren't as quick, in high-speed sections. But it appears that McLaren have improved on that, which is good to see from their point of view. Of course, coming to this Grand Prix, I think people expecting McLaren, even myself, to not be anywhere near as quick as they were at Zandvoort, but still looking pretty competitive. So yeah, they've got the balance right so far between the low downforce wings and still maintaining good grip. And then Yuki Tsunoda second. Like I said, Racing Bulls have had very good straight line speed this weekend, so that's why they're so strong in the first sector. And as you see with the final sector, they are also very strong through there. Haas, no surprise about their strength. Aston Martin, pretty good first sector, I must say. So they've got the balance right as well. Sauber, no surprise, given they've got Ferrari power unit. Ferrari 6th best. You would expect a bit more than that in the first sector. I think at least 1/10 of a second more, maybe even 1/10.5 more. So maybe more pace there to come from Ferrari once everyone turns their power units up to full pelt. Same for Mercedes. I think they can do a bit better in this first sector. Williams, surprisingly, quite slow in the first sector. Don't know if they've maybe put a bit too much downforce on the car. Alpine, no surprise how slow they are. Their engine is the worst on the grid. And then Red Bull, miles back in last place out of all the teams in this first sector. But Red Bull, as we know, tend to be the most conservative on a Friday, so they can go quite a bit quicker than this by, I think, at least 0.3 of a second. So yeah, if you're a Red Bull fan, don't worry about the first sector time speed. I think it will be a lot better in qualifying. But the middle sector is the most aero heavy part of the track, I guess you would say. And saying that, it is still pretty high speed. And obviously, the high speed elements still matter quite a bit. And for Red Bull, this is a part of the track where if they are running conservatively with, the amount of engine power they're using, not going to show up as much in this part of the track. And a bit concerning that Red Bull, in third there, 1/10.5 down on McLaren, because really this sector 2 is really where you do, not entirely, but it's a part of the track where you really can make your lap in qualifying. But Red Bull really lacking compared to McLaren in the middle sector. McLaren once again impressive first middle sector speed. Mercedes pretty decent as well. Red Bull though got to improve by at least 1/10, you would imagine. Because if they're this far back in the middle sector and not put, as quick in the first and third sector as maybe they should be, then they're going to struggle in qualifying. Ferrari, I'm not sure Ferrari really can do that much better in the middle sector, to be honest. This is always going to be the weakest part of the track for them. So, yeah, can't really blame them too much for that lap time. And then Aston Martin 5th, no surprise there. They aerodynamically have the best package out of the midfield. Haas, pretty decent. Middle sector. Racing Bulls, pretty good. Middle sector speed there, considering how, I think, skinny they've gone on their wings. So, yeah, pretty good speed for Racing Bulls. Sauber, not great. Williams, not great. And Alpine, even worse. And then the final sector where, again, you can make your lap in the final sector. You can absolutely make a difference in this final sector to get you an extra position or two. But after the Ascari chicane, which annoyingly has been made a lot easier this year by the remodeling of the curbs through the Ascari chicane, after the Ascari chicane, really, it's about letting the car do the work. And through the final sector, Mercedes ending the lap very well, which is encouraging to see. McLaren, I mean, maybe you could argue they should do a tad better in the final sector, but I think their final sector speed is still pretty good. Ferrari as well, I think their final sector speed is okay enough. Racing Bulls, you can see they're 4th best in the final sector. Again, illustrating how great their car is, or has been, with skinnier wings this weekend. And Red Bull, almost 0.4 of a second down on Mercedes in the final sector. That is because Max just wasn't able to have good grip, I think, especially through Parabolica, the final corner. So it could be better in the final sector for Red Bull, but I think overall for them, they just fundamentally don't have the pace that I thought they would have. So, yeah, a bit of a concern for Red Bull. They're not, miles off or anything. They're not like half a second or more off the pace. They're still within 1/3 of a second. But I think they're probably going into qualifying 3rd best at the very best. And I think even that's maybe pushing it, because Ferrari still look pretty competitive. So, yeah, I'm not confident about Red Bull at all in this qualifying session coming up in just over an hour's time. Haas looking good. Aston Martin okay. Williams a bit better, I think they can do there in that final sector. Alpine a bit better for them actually in the final sector. And then Sauber, for some reason, dropping off massively in the final sector. But we just go back to the top 10 here from practice 2. It is hard to say what the pecking order is, especially with the top 4 teams, but I will give it a go. I think Mercedes, overall for the entire lap, I think they've got just about the best car for qualifying. And it all really is because, again, of that final sector where Mercedes are, by the looks of it, able to just maintain good speed. McLaren looking very quick in the middle sector, but can they maintain that for the rest of the lap? Not sure if they can, but again, it's going to be very close between them and the Mercedes Works team. But I would put Mercedes ahead of them. So I think, yeah, Mercedes, I would say quickest going into qualifying. McLaren then second. And then not very far behind at all, Ferrari third. And then I'd have to say Red Bull fourth. From what I've seen so far, I think Red Bull are not in the top 3 teams here, which, again, is a massive surprise. You would think here they would be no slower than the second best team. But, yeah, I mean, if they end up in this qualifying session as the second best team, I think they'd be pretty happy with that, considering how, considering how the weekend has gone so far for them. But yeah, we'll see truly what pace they've got when qualifying comes. Haas, definitely, I think, have got the best midfield car for qualifying. Followed up by, I think, Racing Bulls, purely because of the straight line speed they're showing. So yeah, Racing Bulls, I would go, 6th best team. 7th, I would go Aston Martin. 8th, I'd go Williams. And then 9th, Sauber. And I think 10th, Alpine. So that's my pecking order for qualifying. For the top 3 or 4 teams, I could be very wrong. But I think for the midfield, I think mostly I should be correct. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. But let me get into my qualifying prediction, which of course I give before every qualifying session. And here it is. It's going to be a close session. George Russell by, I think, just over 100th or so of a second, will take pole position for Mercedes. Oscar Piastri will be on the front row in second. Lando Norris will be right behind in third. Lewis Hamilton then I think will be fourth, with Leclerc fifth, Verstappen sixth, and Carlos Sainz in seventh. And then Hülkenberg in eighth place for Haas, Ricciardo ninth, and Sergio Perez will round out the top 10. The top 3 or 4, it's going to be super close. We're talking a tenth of a second, maybe 0.2 of a second at the absolute most. It is going to be insane today. And that's exactly what we want. This is what we've been crying out for years. Multiple teams fighting for pole position. And that is exactly what we've got here at Monza. But let me know, guys, in the chat, what your predictions are. Make sure to vote in the poll if you haven't already. Or, comment in the chat what your top 5 for qualifying is. Let me know over the next, hour or so. And I'll try and get through some of those predictions before we get into qualifying itself. As we've got just over an hour to go until qualifying is underway. So we do have a couple more things to get through. Let's firstly go on to upgrades. Now, some of the teams have brought minor upgrades, but there has been one team, the home team, that has brought one big final upgrade for the season to give themselves, they hope, one big final push, maybe to winning some races, or maybe even getting into that Constructors' Championship battle. But we'll start with Mercedes. Mercedes, just a slightly new rear wing. Nothing special. Maybe, if it does work for them, maybe it'll give them a tenth of a second at most. But yeah, it shouldn't be a massive gain of lap time. But here are the new upgrades for Ferrari. A new nose and mirror, and a also completely new floor. New floor fences, new floor body, new floor edge, and also a new engine cover and diffuser. This is Ferrari throwing the kitchen sink at the rest of the season. Now, again, I must emphasize this for any Ferrari fans out there. You are not going to see the full effect of this upgrade until the Singapore Grand Prix in 3 weeks' time. We may see a bit of an effect here at Monza if they do end up on pole, and if, let's say, they're very strong in the middle sector, maybe you could point to that and say, hey, the upgrade's working. But in terms of seeing its full effect, again, you're going to have to wait another 3 weeks until Singapore. And I really hope this upgrade does work for them. I really hope it does. Because if we get Ferrari improving, and let's say their lap time improves by, 3-4 tenths, maybe even half a second, then we'll have Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, and Mercedes to a degree fighting for race wins at every race from here to the end of the season. And who doesn't want that? That is, that's peak Formula One right there. So please God, if there is a God, give Ferrari that lap time that they require, because it would make the end of this season just perfect. It really would. And maybe, like I said, in the Constructors' Championship, given that Ferrari are, I think, 74 points behind Red Bull, it's not impossible that they could win the Constructors' Championship if this upgrade works for them. So, we will see. But I really hope it does work for them. Not just as well for the rest of this year, but also looking ahead to next season. Because, of course, next season, Lewis Hamilton coming into the team. And they really need next year to be a top team and to really be, fighting for race wins and that. And if this upgrade does work, allowing them to have a strong end to the year like they had last year, then maybe that is what they need to start next year, in strong fashion. So, yeah, really hope this upgrade works for them. McLaren, new engine cover, just a reshaped side pod for them. Nothing special. New rear wing for Aston Martin. New floor body and halo for Racing Bulls. New floor body and diffuser for the Sauber team. And for Haas, a new front suspension. I think really the next Grand Prix where we're going to see big upgrades, probably the last Grand Prix where we're going to see big upgrades, will probably be Singapore in 3 weeks' time. And after that, it's going to be minor upgrades until the end of the season, really, from the rest of the teams. So, won't really have to talk about upgrades for that much longer. Again, because we are getting to that part of the season where upgrades can't really be made anymore because of the cost cap and the development restrictions we have in Formula One. But let me come back to this screen and get up the countdown again for you guys. As we've got, there you go, 1 hour and 1 minute to go until qualifying begins at Monza. But a couple things I just want to get through before we go on to your comments in the chat. And by the way, keep them coming. And as well, if you haven't hit the like button yet, make sure to do so. It does help the channel and the algorithm and help show me that you guys actually like the content. So yeah, make sure to smash that like button if you haven't already. Yeah, a couple bits of news to get into. Of course, Franco Colapinto replacing Logan Sargent at Williams. Let me just try and get comfortable here. There you go. So yeah, Franco Colapinto replacing Logan Sargent. You guys know my opinion on Logan Sargent. I mean, this time last year, I was I had summed up or made my mind up in regards to my thoughts about the guy. Logan had already proved last year that he was not good enough for Formula One. Could not get near Alexander Albon. And because he not just, was heavily beaten by Albon, but was, couldn't get anywhere near him on lap time. That's why Logan Sargent lost his drive. And I'll be honest, he was lucky, Logan, that he made it as far as he did. Because he should not have been in the car this year at all. After last year, we saw that Logan was not good enough and was very lucky to be in the car in 2024. And I think James Vowles, the Williams team principal, I think he was looking for replacements for him, but he didn't find one in the winter that was a clear upgrade that they could, sign up for maybe a couple years or so, given certain contract situations around, in Formula One. Of course, one is, Liam Lawson, a driver that Williams like a lot, but is contracted to Red Bull, and I think Red Bull have got their own plans with him. So that's really why they kept Logan at the team. And then, had, another season of just awful results, no pace, more crashes, and after what happened at Zandvoort, a big crash, rightly decided, that's it, you're done. We're going to replace you. And they replaced him with Franco Colapinto, who is I would say a good Formula 2 driver. Whether he's good enough for Formula 1, we are going to, see in these remaining races in 2024. I think he's earned the chance to prove himself in Formula 1 as Franco, but it's not a clear case of like an Antonelli or a Behrman where we know they're good enough for Formula 1. So we'll see what Colapinto does. And I know people might say, well, why have they replaced Logan with a guy who isn't exactly the best option to go with? James Vowles did say that, they preferred to go after Liam Lawson, but again, Red Bull were not willing to allow him to join Williams because they have got their own plans with him. And Helmut Marko has even said that Lawson is guaranteed a drive on the grid, I think, for next year. So that's why Williams didn't sign Lawson. I think if Williams were allowed to, I think they would have. And Lawson, I think, would have been very willing to go to the Williams team. There was talk of Mick Schumacher, but, James Vowles came out and said that Mick just wasn't, I guess, good enough compared to what they were looking for. And let's be honest with Mick, he's already proved what he is in Formula 1. He just isn't really good enough to be in Formula 1, is Mick Schumacher. If you employ him, he's only going to have maybe 1 or 2 good races in every 5 races. And that's not enough for a midfield team. That's why Williams for next year have gone for the driver lineup of Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz, because they want 2 very consistent drivers in that car, because they know if they have that, they'll score a lot more points in 2025 and beyond. That's what midfield teams need. 2 quick, consistent drivers. And, well, they are hard to come by. But Williams have got that. So, yeah, that's why Logan Sargent is out of Formula 1. I've seen a load of people crying on Twitter, oh, Logan wasn't treated right. Oh, baby Logan and all this rubbish. I don't get why Logan has a fan base. He was clearly the worst driver on the grid. And it didn't seem to me that his fan base was from a place of irony like it was with Nicholas Latifi. Where with Latifi, the reason he had a fan base was because he was a meme. Doesn't feel like that with Logan Sargent. It feels like there was a lot of people that were genuinely fans of him, even though he was positively terrible in Formula 1. But, losers tend to latch on to other losers, and as much as I'm sure Logan's a great guy, in terms of results on the track, he was a loser, and that's why he is no longer on the grid. But I do think he can still go on and have a decent career. I mean, IndyCar, I'm sure, is a place that he could end up. Oscar Piastri has still said some great things about him in terms of, he was one of the toughest opponents he had in junior formula. So, it's not like his career's over. he'll still have a good career, but just not in Formula One. He isn't one of the 20 best Formula One drivers or drivers in the world. Sorry. And that's why he's not on the grid. Now, the other bit of news is Mercedes have announced their replacement for 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton, and it is Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Despite his crash yesterday in practice 1, where after setting, I think, a pretty good lap time to start with, he then binned it at Parabolica, going way too quick into the corner. Mercedes clearly had already made the decision. I mean, Toto, I think, even came out and said that he had made the decision quite a long time ago that Kimi Antonelli was going to be the replacement for Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, fully deserved. I've been talking about this guy for the last 2 years. This kid, Kimi Antonelli, I think is generational. And possibly we're talking about a kid who, remember, is only 18 years old. I think we're talking about a kid who could be Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton level or caliber of driver. We will have to see next year whether he truly is that special. I really hope he is, because we, with how much quality there is at the top of the grid, if we add Antonelli to that, a possible generational driver, then oh my god, next year is going to be fun. But yeah, if Antonelli turns out as great as I think he's going to be, then Mercedes have made a brilliant decision. And maybe Antonelli will be the long-term leader of the Mercedes team, because, his teammate for next season, of course, is going to be George Russell. George Russell is a very good driver, and I think he's a potential world champion, but Russell, I wouldn't say is generational. I think he's not that far from being generational, but he's not quite on that, Verstappen Hamilton level. But he is a very, very good driver. And like I said with Russell, I think he does have the potential to be a world champion. And I do think has quite a high ceiling, but just isn't, again, on that, say, Verstappen Hamilton level of talent. With Antonelli, I think having Russell as a teammate is absolutely perfect for him, because if he comes in next season and comfortably beats Russell, a driver, by the way, who's having an incredible season. I mean, you saw my driver rankings. I had Russell as the second best driver of the season so far, which I still stick by. And Russell has comfortably been better this season than Lewis Hamilton. If Antonelli can come in next season and do to Russell what Russell's done to Hamilton, then right away, again, you're looking at a generational driver and a clear future world champion, and it just depends at that point on the car. So yeah, I am very excited to see Kimi Antonelli in Formula One. And if Mercedes remain as competitive next year as they are now, I think it is quite likely that Antonelli will win a race next season, maybe more than one race next year. I will probably try and do a video on Antonelli in the winter, because I want to kind of preview his debut season, because it's going to be, I think, a very exciting debut season. Maybe not quite Lewis Hamilton in 2007, but I don't think it will be massively far off of it. So yeah, I cannot wait to see Antonelli in F1. Like I said, I've been talking about the guy for the last 2 years. It's been obvious for the last 2 years, and even going back maybe even longer into his karting days, that this kid is special. And despite Prema not getting the F2 cars right and not really getting to grips with these new F2 cars, Antonelli's still doing very well in the Formula 2 Championship, and has easily been better than Oliver Behrman, who of course will be at Haas next year and is another great prospect. So yeah, Antonelli on the grid. One other interesting thing, though, is Antonelli and Russell next year both will be in the final year of their contracts. Antonelli has only been given a 1-year contract. George Russell, like I said, next year will be the final year of his contract. And we know why that is. It is because I believe the driver in this picture on screen behind Lewis Hamilton is Max Verstappen. And it is because Mercedes still have opened the door, and there's no reason why they shouldn't, to Max Verstappen joining the team in 2026. And if Max does decide to join, then clearly whoever is better out of Antonelli and Russell will be Max Verstappen's teammate in 2026. But will Max actually go to Mercedes? Who knows? Max might go to Aston Martin. He might stay at Red Bull Racing. We have no idea what's going to happen in the driver market in the next year or so. It should be very interesting to see, though. But yeah, if Antonelli turns out to be as good as I think he is, then again, I think we're looking at a generational driver and possibly the first Italian world champion, I think, since it'd be since Ascari, wouldn't it? I think isn't Ascari the last Italian F1 world champion? And I think Antonelli is probably going to be the one that breaks that drought for the Italians, because when Formula One started, Italian drivers mostly were dominating Formula One, but then of course other drivers decided to dominate. Fangio, Clark, Stewart, Prost, Senna, Schumacher, all those drivers. But Martin Brundle even said it on commentary at Zandvoort that back in his day, I think, what was it, like 1989, there was like 15 Italian drivers on the grid. So it is weird, especially if you're quite a bit older than I am. It is weird not to have any Italians on the grid because, again, back in the 80s and the 90s, there were Italians left, right, and centre. And I mean, the same goes for Brazilian drivers as well. There used to be Brazilian drivers all over the place. Looks like we may get a Brazilian driver on the grid, maybe, for next season. I'll get into that probably at a later date. But, yeah, Antonelli, I believe in him. I think he's special. And I think if he does perform next year to his absolute highest level, I think Mercedes have possibly bagged themselves maybe the next Lewis Hamilton or the next Max Verstappen. It should be very exciting next year. And let's hope we do have next year a proper title race with, Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc, Norris, Piastri, Russell, Antonelli. Imagine that, all those drivers in a title race. We would be truly spoiled if that was to happen. But yeah, make sure to keep your comments coming in the chat, as we've got about 45 minutes to go until the green light at the end of the pit lane goes on and qualifying begins. Of course, there will be shenanigans in qualifying when it comes to a slipstream and all of that stuff, and blocking and stuff like that. So it's going to be a bit of a messy qualifying, as it usually is at Monza. The Woden says, calling someone generational talent when they wrote off the car in their first laps is jumping the gun a bit. I'm calling him generational because of what he's done in other Formula. What happened yesterday is, for me, is irrelevant, really. I mean, there has been plenty of drivers who, in their first day of testing for a new team, have crashed. It's happened a lot. The only difference compared to maybe back in the day is obviously we had a lot of testing back in the day where there wouldn't be cameras. So, yeah, I mean, who cares at the end of the day? Honestly, who cares? I mean, Max sure had his accidents when he was young, when he, joined Formula One when he was 17 or 18. Did it stop him from being generational and becoming an amazing, great, elite best in the world driver? No, it didn't, because the cream always rises to the top. And that's what I think Antonelli is. But yeah, he's a special driver, is Antonelli. The Woden says, I'm not saying he's not, but how many people fail when they step up to F1? To be honest, in the last 10 years, I think it's half and half, if not maybe most drivers, I would say, that get into the grid end up doing well. It's not like, back in maybe the 80s or the 90s where, in the bottom half of the grid, you would have loads of new drivers and none of them would end up doing anything. I think, when we get new drivers on the grid lately, most of them end up doing fine. So, and you are going to get the odd, Mazepin, Sargent, Latifi, drivers like that, or maybe drivers that had a bit of hype but disappointed, like Mick Schumacher. But I think most drivers who come onto the grid end up delivering, given the cars they're driving, of course, they end up delivering what they should in again in the machinery they're in, and given what we expect of them. The Woden says Max didn't write cars off in his first practice. In fact, he was so good Red Bull had to sign him. Why is it? I'm not trying to argue with you, but why is it so important that Antonelli crashed in his first practice? It's practice. Who cares? Top drivers. There's been many race weekends where top drivers have had massive crashes in practice and then gone to win the race. Who cares? And the situation with Antonelli, him being put in the Mercedes, it's similar to Max. Even though he's so young, he's so good, Mercedes have had to put him in the car. Just because he crashed in practice yesterday means nothing. Means absolutely nothing. Top drivers crash in practice all the time, and it literally, 99% of the time doesn't matter. The only times it matters is if it's like practice 3 and you have a massive crash to the point where you can't participate in qualifying. But on a Friday, again, who cares? I mean, that's what practice is for at the end of the day. As long as you don't crash when it matters, who cares? Laurie says, my only concern if these crashes keep continuing, Tessa, but if his pace is there, it's there. I don't think Antonelli is really a driver that crashes that much, to be honest. But we have to be honest as well. The younger you are, the more you tend to have accidents. That's the way it always is with racing drivers. The older you get, the less accidents you have. So, yeah. But again, him crashing in practice yesterday was absolutely, So for me, it was just like the reaction to it was just overblown. I saw that, was it Tomo, the F1 YouTuber, did like a 10-minute video talking about it. I have no idea what he had to say about it, but I am baffled as to why he did a 10-minute video talking about a crash in practice. Because again, who cares? It's practice. Practice sessions hold the same weight as F1 testing sessions. No, if a driver has a crash in a testing session, who cares? Again, as long as you don't crash when it matters, then it's fine. Anyway, let's go through some other comments here. Hello to everyone on the chat. Good to see you all. Nicholas says, hope Charles gets pole on the victory on tomorrow. It's going to be hard for him to do that, Leclerc. But I will say that if the car is legitimately quick enough for him to get pole, watch out for Leclerc. Because at the minute, Leclerc, I think, is performing at his absolute peak. What we saw at Zandvoort was just incredible. I still maintain he was driver of the day at Zandvoort. That was just an incredible performance. And then, at Spa, taking pole and finishing on the podium. And even the race before that in Hungary, he wasn't that far from the podium. I think only a few seconds away in a race where Ferrari weren't expected to do anything at all. So, yeah, Leclerc at the minute is, like I said, performing at his absolute peak. If the car is good enough, though, then we might get another special day at Monza. Astro says, and good to see you, mate, says, I hope and reckon Oscar Piastri can get pole here and do a Danny Rick style Monza win for McLaren here again. Well, if the grid ends up shaking out how I predicted it, with Piastri, say, up in second, Norris third, Russell on pole, Verstappen back in sixth, given McLaren's race pace, I think Piastri would be pretty likely to win the race, even if he doesn't get pole, but ends up ahead of his teammate. So I think that's the key for Oscar if he's going to win this race this weekend, is out-qualifying Lando, which I think he did last year, if I'm not mistaken. If he can out-qualify Lando and end up second or even third, again, with the McLaren's race pace and how well they managed their tyres, I think he could probably still win the race. So, yeah, we will see whether he can do that. KH says Norris and Hamilton front row. Astra says reckon Piastri on pole ahead of Norris and the Ferraris and the Mercedes and the Verstappen and somebody else. KH says Leclerc for P3. Will F1 says not a chance Norris wins the championship. Even though the gap is 70 points exactly, at this point, I don't think I can say that, because, I mean, if Red Bull were looking really quick here compared to McLaren, and Max ended up, winning the race this weekend, then I probably would agree. But if McLaren, if Lando ends up finishing first or second here, and Max is like third or fourth, then I think the championship absolutely is possible for Lando. Because if McLaren are beating Red Bull here, then McLaren should beat Red Bull everywhere. And after their upgrade at Zandvoort, they just look incredible, do McLaren. This is the best McLaren car we've seen since, at least 2012, if not, since like the late 2000s. It's just an incredibly quick car. Astra says, feel like Ferrari could pull out something special because Monza, but McLaren have fastest car. Well, do remember, of course, Ferrari in the last 2 years have taken pole position. Carlos Sainz it was last year, and the year before it was Leclerc. And I think last year, I don't think we were expecting Ferrari to take pole, if I remember correctly. Or one of those years, we weren't expecting it to happen. I think it might have been 2022, actually. We weren't expecting Ferrari to be on pole, yet they ended up doing it. So it's possible. They're not miles away on lap time. We're talking a couple tenths of a second at most, which is, not a lot. Let's see if I can find some other comments here. Astro saying, hoping Danny Rick does well here too. Well, he's looking good so far. The Woden says, yeah, should be called the Ascari corner now. They have absolutely ruined that corner. And what they've done is, so the old Ascari chicane was, the curbing was a lot smaller, but also had some height to them. So, like, you could probably use the curbs slightly, but you couldn't, like, climb all over the curbs. Because if you did, you would do what Sebastian Vettel did in 2019 and spin in the Ascari chicane. And then, like, even on the exit of the Ascari chicane, you couldn't, the inside curve that was there, you couldn't hit it too much, because if you did, you would do a full 360 or just smash into the barriers. Now, they've again, completely changed the curbing, and now the inside curbing for the main, like, middle part of the Ascari chicane is now wider and flat, and then the inside curb on the exit of the Ascari chicane is again wider and flat. So now, when they enter the Ascari chicane, obviously they, brake, turn in, and then they're just flat through there. When before they had to be, they would be flat, but it was all about precision. If you weren't quite on the exact right line, you couldn't go as flat through there as you could previously. But now, like I said, you just turn in, get back on the gas, and then just flat through the rest of the chicane, easy peasy. They've just ruined it. And this is not, this is not a criticism of Liberty Media or anything, because it's not their fault. This was happening before Liberty even took over Formula One. Ever since, I think, what year was it? Was it 20... I'm trying to remember what year was it. Was it 2014 where they got rid of the gravel on the exit of the final corner, the Parabolica? Ever since then, they have just progressively ruined this track and made it easier and easier to drive. That's not what we want. We want the track to be tough. We want there to be, if the drivers make mistakes, we want there to be something there like gravel that will punish them, or curbs that are not that easy to ride and may cause you to spin, again, to punish drivers that don't I guess treat the track with the respect it deserves. But no, the way Monza is now, it's just it's like they're trying. It's like, the lap is it 80 or 81% full throttle. It's like they're trying to make it even more full throttle than it already was. I mean, there's been talk that they want to turn the two Lesmos back to what they used to be, where they were a lot quicker and a lot faster. And if they do that, then the two Lesmos next year may end up being, or not next year, but if they end up doing that in the future, the two Lesmos might end up being flat out corners, which would mean that the track would be, 85, 90% flat out? It's like, at this point, are we just creating a fucking oval racetrack with Monza? I mean, it used to be a bit of an oval, obviously, a long time ago, but that's what it feels like. They're trying to create like a Formula One oval track. I mean, high-speed tracks, yeah, they can provide entertainment, but if there's too much of it, it kind of ruins the whole, flow of the track. So, yeah. I just don't like what they've done on the Monza circuit. In the last 10 years, they have just progressively ruined it. But what can we do? It's not a Formula One decision. That those track changes, those were the decisions of the people running the circuit, and it's their right, of course, but they're just making the track worse. But I will go through more of your comments in a moment, but I just need to post the link of the stream out one more time before we get into qualifying, because we are half an hour away from the start of the session. There is another thing I wanted to get into, which was a bit of a channel update in terms of what my plan for content is for the next 3 weeks, because of course next weekend there isn't a race, but then the 2 weekends after that we've got a back-to-back in Baku and Singapore. So I will just give you an update as to what my plans are for the next 3 weeks at the moment. Let me just quickly do this post. Come join us here for a multi-race team battle for pole position at the Temple of Speed. And there you go. So that is all posted out. So yeah, obviously this weekend, if you don't know, obviously I'm doing a qualifying watch along here. Tomorrow I will be doing a race watch along. I'll be doing the usual times. I'll be going live 2 hours before the race starts at 12 p.m. UK time. For a usual build-up, Nib, my co-commentator, should be along with me for the race. And then obviously we'll cover the race and that'll be it. And then, of course, on Monday, I'll upload a review of the Italian Grand Prix. So yeah, that will be the plan for the next couple days. And then, of course, 2-week break between this Grand Prix and the next one in Baku. There won't be any content in between the podcast on Monday and when we get to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. But just to update you as to what watch-alongs I will be doing for Baku and Singapore, I will not be doing a race watch-along for either the Azerbaijan or Singapore Grand Prix. But I will be doing a qualifying watch-along for both of those races. So that'll be a qualifying watch-along for Baku, but not a race watch-along. But then, of course, I'll do a podcast reviewing that race. And then the same the week after for Singapore. Qualifying watch-along, no race watch-along, but then a podcast reviewing that race. And then, of course, there is, after that Singapore Grand Prix, a 4-week break until the next Grand Prix. I will try to upload a couple videos in that 4-week break for you guys. And then, of course, once we get to that US Grand Prix, it's, 6 more races until the end of the season. So, yeah, that's the plan for the next 3 weeks. So, yeah, stream tomorrow, podcast on Monday, and then we'll, for Baku, qualifying watch-along and a podcast reviewing the race, and the same for Singapore, qualifying watch-along and a podcast reviewing that race. And then, like I said, for that 4-week break in between Singapore and the US Grand Prix, I'll try and get a couple videos out on the channel. But we have got 27 minutes to go until qualifying is underway. And let's go through for the next 15 minutes or so some more of your comments. So let's have a look here at what you guys are saying. Let me just have a quick look for some good comments here. Astro says, thought on Kimi Antonelli's performance so far, a lot of pressure, not sure putting a rookie straight into a top team is the best idea. Maybe not for other rookies, but I mean, for a driver of his talent, I think it's worth it. I mean, we saw with Lewis Hamilton, of course, back in 2007. That was risky, especially back then when promoting drivers that young was not something that was as done as it is now. It was quite risky back then, but they did it. But I mean, if Kimi Antonelli proves to be that great, like I said, on like a Verstappen, Hamilton, Leclerc type level, I think he'll be just fine. Because I mean, if you look at Verstappen, yeah, he had a year and a bit in Toro Rosso, but they could have thrown him into the Red Bull and he would have been fine in 2015. And I think with Leclerc, to a degree, I think the same with him. I think they could have thrown him into the Ferrari and he would have been fine. If they can't get Max Verstappen for next year, which clearly they couldn't, what other choice do they have? I mean, yeah, they could go with, or they could have gone with like an Esteban Ocon for a year, or I don't know, someone else for a year. But why not just throw Antonelli in there and see, right, what have you got? And the pressure, obviously there'll be pressure on him to perform because of his, how hyped he is. But Mercedes don't exactly have the best car on the grid, and we don't know if they will next year. We have no idea if Mercedes will even be involved in the championship battle next year. So, in terms of that, there won't be that pressure of not only showing that he's good enough, but also contending for the championship. If he does contend for the championship next year, then great. But that would be a plus, to be honest. I think he'll be fine because I do rate him that highly. And clearly, despite, the crash yesterday and what other doubts you may have about him, Mercedes, Toto Wolff, even Lewis Hamilton are absolutely sure that he is good enough. And if they're sure he's good enough, then I am absolutely sure that he's good enough. Astro says perhaps Antonelli should replace Sargent at Williams. Perhaps he should be at Williams next year with Albon to learn the ropes, like Russell did. Again, you can argue that maybe that would have been better, or would be better for next year. But I mean, Williams decided against it. They went with Carlos Sainz for next year. So yeah. I mean, Antonelli racing for Williams for the rest of the year. Maybe, they could have gone for that, but I think Mercedes are keen to keep him under wraps until next year. The Woden says hopefully Lawson replaces the most washed driver on the grid, Ricard Slow. You say that, but if you look at the last race, even though Ricciardo didn't have a good qualifying, he was way ahead of Tsunoda in the race last week. So let's not, be too egregious. Francisco, good to see you, mate. Says, for me personally, Antonelli's signing is one of the biggest mistakes in the short term that I've seen. A move to Williams to mature and learn would have made much more sense, especially with Sainz available. But the thing is, with, let's say for next year, let's say Mercedes decided to put Sainz in the car instead of Antonelli, and let's say they put Sainz on a 1-year contract because obviously Mercedes are still working, let's say, for Max Verstappen. What do you call it? If Antonelli then proves immediately that he's an amazing driver, then he would still be in the Mercedes, a year later, but at a ridiculously young age. I don't see how it would really make a difference. At the end of the day, if he proves straight away that he's good enough, then he's good enough. You either have it or you don't. And we will find out very soon, next year, whether Antonelli truly does have it or not. So, yeah. Like I said, if you had thrown Max Verstappen in the Red Bull in 2015, I'm confident that Max would have been the best driver in that team straight away. Well, not straight away, but, overall for the year, I think Verstappen would have proved to be better because I think Max was just that good. I mean, Leclerc, if you'd thrown him into the Ferrari in 2018, maybe not against Vettel, who for the first half of the year you could say was at his peak. But I think Leclerc, like I said, would have proved immediately that he was good enough because those absolute top elite drivers, it doesn't matter where you put them, they're not going to underperform. So yeah, we at the end of the day we'll see. But I think Antonelli will be fine because I believe that he is. You know, he's more than just a great driver. I think he's going to be more than just that. Um, Let me find some other comments here if I can. As we've got 20 minutes left. Laurie says, I think Tomo was posing the question to people. I think he had a neutral opinion about the crash. That the thing is, though, I mean, yeah, if he had a neutral opinion and whatever, but I mean, did it really warrant a 10-minute video? I mean, he could have just done a long tweet, sharing his thoughts and then doing like a poll. I mean, was it really worth a 10-minute video? I know, obviously, as YouTubers, we got to chase the bag because that's the game. But I just didn't see how it warranted a 10-minute video. That's all I'll say. I mean, I don't think I'd disagree with his opinion because he's a reasonable guy. But yeah, I was just amazed that he did a video on it because I didn't see it as a big deal, really. I mean, yeah, bit of a shit way to start your first ever drive in a Mercedes car, but if he proves to be as good as I think he will be, I mean, in a year's time, none of us are going to care. So yeah, but yeah, like I said with Antonelli, we will all find out pretty soon how good he really is. Laurie Restu says Norris hasn't been all that great around Monza, out qualified by Piastri and Sainz's teammates around that circuit. Even Ricciardo was competitive with Norris. Yeah, it's not one of Lando's good tracks, that's for sure. But given how quick the car is, still should keep him in a pretty good position, especially compared to Max. So he just needs to maximize, no pun intended, Lando, his own result. And if it ends up better than Max, then great. But that's what he needs to do for the rest of the season, because that's what he wasn't doing in some of the races leading up to the summer break. He wasn't getting the best result he could and doing the best job he could. Spain could have won, Austria could have won, Silverstone could have won, Spa. I mean, given where Piastri ended up, I think Norris should have been at least on the podium. So, that's what separates the drivers who win the world championship from the ones that don't. Is the ones that do win, 95% of the time they get the best result they can in the Grand Prix. But the ones who half the time don't quite get the best result that was on offer, those are the ones that don't win championships or don't win as many championships. And the thing with Lando, we have to remember, great drive and all in Zandvoort, won by 23 seconds, crushed Verstappen after he overtook him. But he still lost the lead to Verstappen on lap 1. So it still wasn't as comfortable a race as it should have been. He should have led from the start to the end. And if he had done that, he probably would have won the race by half a minute. But even though his car and his pace as a combination were way too good for anybody else last week, he still gave Max a chance. And that's my issue with Lando, is he gives Verstappen too many chances. And you can't give Max a load of chances to, beat you and all that, because Max, 99% of the time is going to take those opportunities. And the times he won't will be probably because you've got a better car, like we saw in Zandvoort. That's the reason Lando won the race, because his car was just so much quicker than the Red Bull that it didn't matter that Max, got the jump at the start. Let me find some other comments here. Looney Classic says, I don't see Lando getting 4 or 5 races in a row. He is not there yet. There will be races where Max will beat Lando even with a slower car. I mean, theoretically, the championship is not over because McLaren, clearly have a faster car than Red Bull. But that is ultimately what you just said there. That's ultimately why I don't believe Lando Norris can win the championship, because I don't think Lando has got that consistency where he can go on like a 5-6 in a row win streak, which would maybe win him the championship when we get to the final race in Abu Dhabi. And like I said, even though he won in Zandvoort, he still gave Max a chance by, losing the lead at the start. So, yeah. And the gap, I mean, I will get into the championship standings before we get to qualifying, but yeah, the gap remains at 70 points. By the way, hello to Yanni, good to see you. Hello to Crystal Racing, by the way. Good to see you as well. Willafon says, I still struggle to see a proper title fight in 2025 for Verstappen versus McLaren, and that's it, I reckon. I mean, maybe, yeah. I mean, and that would still be a great title fight, a 3-way championship battle. That would still be great for us. But with the way things are heading in terms of momentum, Red Bull are getting worse, McLaren are getting better, Ferrari have the potential to get better, but they just can't unlock it, and Mercedes are getting better. So if that continues into next year, then, I mean, maybe Red Bull won't even be involved in the championship battle. You never know with how their team is falling apart. Right, let me read out a couple final comments in the chat before I get on to the teams quickly and just go through quickly how I think they will all get on, and also remind you guys of my predictions. Let's see if I can find a good comment here to end off of. Crystal Racing says, RB clearly had beef with Lawson. I think Marco once slammed his attitude. I have not heard anything about that, so I can't comment on that, but I'd be surprised at that, because I think, to me, they sound pretty happy with Lawson. I think maybe a couple years ago when he was younger, maybe they were unhappy with him, but they sound pretty happy with him at the moment. Anyway, let's get rid of that countdown and go through the teams and how I think they'll get on before qualifying. Red Bull, no doubt, are on the back foot. Max Verstappen, of course, is the hope of the team going into qualifying. If he can drag that car onto the second row of the grid and even to say a third place, I think Red Bull would be pretty happy with that, considering how their weekend has been so far. They, like I said, are on the back foot. Do not expect the pole position from this team because, well, I'm not sure it's actually possible here at Monza, even though the gap between the top teams is only a third of a second or so. But yeah, Max, he's going to have to be at his absolute best today if he's going to get a decent result. Sergio Perez, I think there's a very real risk he might not even make the top 10. We'll see. Ferrari, they're in the fight, but they're not quite as quick, I don't think, as Mercedes and McLaren. Car looks good, but it's just not quite as good as the Mercedes and the McLaren car. I think what they're going to have to rely on in this session is their drivers pulling out an amazing lap. And if they can do that, which we've seen in the last couple of years, Sainz took pole last year, Leclerc the year before, if they can pull out a great lap, a properly great lap in Q3, then maybe they can end up on the front row or something like that, or even on pole. But if they can't, pull out that special lap, then it's looking more likely that they'll be around 4th and 5th place, which, of course, for the Scuderia and the Tifosi is not quite what they're looking for. Mercedes, though, looking very good. They've been very quick in practice so far. And I know they were quick a week ago in Zandvoort, and I thought, yeah, they're going to be on pole, and obviously they ended up nowhere near it. This weekend, I'm a lot more confident about my prediction that they will take pole position, because consistently so far through practice, they have looked very good. And all round, the car is quick through all parts of the track. But it will be very close with their main rival for this weekend, McLaren, who, of course, have got the best car on the grid, but this is a track that doesn't suit their strengths. Car still looking good, though, but can they end up on pole? If they can, then it shows that McLaren absolutely, without a doubt, have the best car on the grid and probably will do for the rest of the season. So let's hope that we get a proper battle for pole position today. But Mercedes versus McLaren is, I think, going to be the main fight for pole. But again, Ferrari and Red Bull, they are still there to be able to fight. And then in the midfield, Aston Martin, I think they're going to struggle to get a car in the top 10. If they do, I think it'll only be probably one car, probably being Fernando Alonso. They just don't have enough straight line speed, unfortunately. In the middle sector, their car looks pretty quick, and they look to be the quickest of the midfield teams in the middle sector. But for the rest of the lap, just isn't quite quick enough. Racing Bulls, they are really looking good here. They've got a brilliant setup on their car, and the straight line speed figures have been very good for Racing Bulls. Watch out for them, and watch out for Daniel Ricciardo. He normally is very quick at this track. Of course, won here 3 years ago. Ricciardo was in the top 10 in practice too, and I do fancy he'll have a good day today. Alpine, nothing to talk about. The only thing actually to talk about with them is the protest that they're throwing this weekend. So back in France at their home base, the people back there at their home base are on strike, and there is a few people at the track this weekend, Alpine/Renault employees who are supporting that strike, and also I think black armbands being worn to support those strikers. Alpine once again in tatters. Williams not looking as quick as I expected coming into the weekend, but they're still there to to fight for a Q3 appearance. Franco Colapinto, of course, will make his qualifying debut. Has looked pretty decent so far. Very interested to see how he does. Sauber looking pretty shit. And Haas look like they've probably got the best midfield car for qualifying. Watch out for Nico Hülkenberg. He's been brilliant in qualifying in the last couple years. And if he doesn't make any mistakes today, I think he'll definitely be in the top 10, maybe even in the top 7 or 8. But let me get into my predictions for qualifying here at Monza. I think George Russell just about will take pole position for Mercedes-Benz ahead of Oscar Piastri in the McLaren, second, and then Lando Norris third. Hamilton, I think, will be in fourth, with Leclerc fifth, Verstappen sixth, Sainz seventh, and then Hülkenberg eighth, with Ricciardo ninth, and Sergio Perez, I think, just about will sneak in to the top 10 in P10. But we have got, guys, about 5-6 minutes to go until qualifying begins. And of course, we will get into a couple final things before the session. Of course, championship standings will go through, and some stats regarding the top teams and drivers to remember going into this session. And then we'll be into qualifying itself. And like I said, first couple parts of qualifying will be a bit messy because obviously teams and drivers desperate to get a tow, slipstream, all that stuff. And we might see some shenanigans, let's say, in qualifying. Yeah, just waiting for the F1 intro, which I think is just about playing now. It is. So, I think we will just get into these last couple things before the session. Remember, there is a poll running at the top of the live chat. Let me know who you think will take pole out of those options in that poll. And if you haven't already, make sure to smash the like button. It does help the channel and the algorithm, and again, helps show me that you guys actually enjoy the content. But let's get into the championship standings before this important session. Max Verstappen 70 points clear of Lando Norris. And that gap, I think, is probably going to keep coming down over these next few races. Leclerc 103 points behind Verstappen in third. Oscar Piastri in fourth, with Carlos Sainz in fifth. Hamilton sixth. Perez seventh. George Russell eighth. Fernando Alonso ninth. And Lance Stroll in the top 10 by a couple points. And then on the constructors' end, Red Bull only 30 points clear of McLaren. I reckon in the next couple races, McLaren are going to take the lead of the Constructors' Championship. Ferrari in third, only 74 points behind Red Bull. If they can improve their car, then they are not exactly out of the Constructors' Championship battle yet. Mercedes in fourth, Aston Martin fifth, Racing Bull sixth, Haas seventh, Alpine eighth, Williams ninth, and Sauber at the very back. And let's get into some stats regarding these top teams. So Max Verstappen, he's only started on pole at Monza once, and that was in 2021. Not a great record here at qualifying for Max Verstappen and the Red Bull team. Red Bull, that pole position where Max started on pole in 2021, that's the only pole they've had, other than, you'd have to go back to, 2013 with Sebastian Vettel, where that weekend they locked out the front row, but of course that was a completely different era. And their last pole position in F1 was back in Austria, which wasn't that long ago, but for Red Bull, given how successful they've been in the last couple years, was an eternity. Ferrari, they've taken pole at the last two races at Monza. Like I said, Carlos Sainz was on pole last year and Leclerc the year before. Ferrari also have taken pole at Monza 4 times since 2015. Obviously, Raikkonen on pole here in 2018 and Leclerc in 2019. And Ferrari's last pole, of course, was at Spa only a couple races ago. But Mercedes, their last pole at Monza was in 2020 with Lewis Hamilton, a race they ended up not even finishing on the podium for. They've taken pole at Monza also 4 times since 2015. And their last pole was at Silverstone, a race where, of course, they won and they locked out the front row. And for McLaren, they have started on pole at Monza only once since 2010. And that last pole at Monza was in 2012 with Lewis Hamilton. That weekend, they locked out the front row and went on to win the race. McLaren have started on pole, though, 3 times in the last 6 races. So in terms of qualifying in the last 6 races, McLaren are the most informed team. And now, let's get into the first part of qualifying. Of course, Q1 will be a 17-minute long session. Not 17 minutes, sorry, 18-minute long session, but I will sync up the timer at the 17-minute mark. But yeah, we are just under a minute away from the start of qualifying. And also, another bit of information, the 3 tyre compounds this weekend are the 3 softest that Pirelli have. The C5, the C4 and the C3. With how hot it's going to be this weekend, could make things interesting in the race. We may get some earlier pit stops tomorrow than ideally planned. Because there has been talk that the track temperature, now that the Monza circuit has been fully resurfaced, there has been talk that with how hot it is, the air temperature in the low 30s degrees Celsius, of course, the track temperature might go above 50 degrees Celsius. which would be incredibly hot. We haven't had a race that hot in, I think, a couple years at least. But the session has begun. No cars on track yet. And it's not exactly going to be a rush onto the track. As we're looking at Ferrari on the TV broadcast, who look like they'll come out probably in the next minute or so, as there's some Leclerc fans in the grandstands. And yep, here comes the Ferrari, I think, of Leclerc. It's actually both Ferrari cars coming out. And let's see what they can do. Obviously took pole in the last 2 years here. I mean, last year we kind of saw it coming, them getting pole position, because I think they were very quick in practice. The year before, not as much, but they were expected to be very quick here. If they were to get pole here yet again, though, this would be probably the best pole position they've had here in quite a long time, because even if you go back to 2018 and 2019, they were expected to get pole position on those weekends. When this weekend, I don't think they're even expected to be on the front row necessarily. But in terms of the pole position time, I think pole position today is going to be somewhere between a 19.5 and a 19.8. That's what I think pole position will be today. So if anyone can do a 1 minute 19, they are really doing good, and they're going to be very high on up on the grid. As we look at Carlos Sainz, who is slowly touring through the exit of the Ascari chicane. Obviously wants to pick up a toe. There's a Haas ahead of him, but it's a bit too far ahead of him. So he's not really going to get a slipstream for this lap. But yeah, we've got the 2 Ferraris on track. We've got 2 Alpines, 2 Haases, and a Sauber of Zhou Guanyu. Zhou Guanyu you would expect to be eliminated in this session. As here comes Carlos Sainz, who was driver of the day here last year. Driver of the weekend as well. It was a top performance that weekend. And it gave him the confidence that ultimately he needed to go and win the Singapore Grand Prix a couple weeks after that, which was one of the best performances of his career. But good first sector for Sainz. As Gasly says, I have some smoke coming out the front brakes. That's probably just brakes that are too hot. Carlos Sainz, big oversteer moment on the exit of the second Lesmo. Touched the gravel as well, and he's had to abort that lap. And now he will provide a tow to his teammate, as Ocon has gone quickest for Alpine, as the first lap time's being set. Pierre Gasly is up to second, not anymore. Hulkenberg up to P1. Leclerc is in a purple middle sector. I'll read out what his lap time is in a moment. Obviously, he's going to go quickest, and here he comes. And it's a 1:20.0. That is a brilliant start to qualifying. 0.7 of a second quicker than Hulkenberg, the next car, when through practice, Hulkenberg hasn't been that far behind. So that is a brilliant first lap of qualifying from Leclerc. And that probably won't be, I mean, maybe a few tenths, but it won't be a million miles off of what the pole position time is. So Leclerc quickest with a brilliant time. Hulkenberg second, as we're looking at Max Verstappen about to start his first qualifying lap. For Magnussen, he is in third, and then it's Ocon fourth, Gasly fifth, Zhou in sixth, and then Carlos Sainz in P7 as Max Verstappen enters the first chicane. No issues. As Lando Norris has also begun his first qualifying lap. And here comes Verstappen as Sainz has checked the floor of the car. Not a good first sector for Max. 10th.5 down on Leclerc. We saw yesterday a Red Bull car was not very quick in the first sector. The middle sector, not really a surprise, looks to be the quickest part of the track for Red Bull. But they've got to improve in the other areas. As Max slightly touched the gravel, the exit of the second Lesmo. Lando Norris may have done the same. But yeah, this is it's not a terrible lap for Max, but I don't think it's going to put him ahead of Leclerc, which is what Red Bull would be wanting, as Perez goes fourth behind the two Haases, a second away from Leclerc. Here comes Max Verstappen, who goes a 10th.5 slower, which, again, that's not a bad lap time. It's still a good lap time to start qualifying, but 10th.5 away from Leclerc as Lando Norris goes quickest at a 1:19.9. And I think right there we've already seen that Red Bull pace isn't there. Because that lap from Verstappen, that he didn't make any mistakes, and yet he was slower than the Ferrari and the McLaren. As is a replay of Piastri going deep at the first chicane, going across a little bit of gravel. And Piastri, his brakes were smoking quite heavily. So I hope there's no brake issues there. Probably just really hot brakes. That's maybe why he went deep. Did Piastri. But here's Piastri again, as Alex Albon has gone fifth. Colapinto has gone up to 8th place. Really hope Colapinto does well. First Argentinian on the grid, by the way. I think since 2001. And I think... Or is it 2001? Or I think it's either the 2000, 2001, or it's 99. One of those years. The last time we had an Argentinian on the grid. Obviously, we've had some great Argentinian drivers. Juan Manuel Fangio, of course, one of the best of all time. Carlos Reutemann. As Oscar Piastri coming to now the straight that heads down to the Parabolica. Tsunoda is 9th. As Piastri, really good apex there at Parabolica. What's his lap time as he comes to the line? It's a 1:20.4. And it's nearly 0.6 of a second slower than Norris. So I hope he hasn't... I mean, I think he went deep at one of the chicanes on that lap. But I hope he hasn't done any damage to his car. Because that would be very sad. As we're looking at George Russell here on his first qualifying lap. Russell finished on the podium here 2 years ago. And I think actually, he may have started on the front row in that race because of penalties for other drivers. Of course, this used to be a race, didn't it, where we would get loads of grid penalties, but thankfully that's not a thing anymore, as Lance Stroll goes 8th. Valtteri Bottas goes 13th. As to the line, Mr. Saturday comes, and he does a 1:20.3 and goes 4th, which is a decent start, but it's not quite the lap time Mercedes are hoping for today. And Lewis Hamilton does a 1:20.4. So yeah, decent lap times, but Mercedes will want to be going a lot quicker than that today. And they actually did, Mercedes, I think a 120.0 or something around that in practice 3. So that's not even as quick as Mercedes went in practice 3. So there is definitely more lap time in that Mercedes car, as we've got all 20 times on the board now. Carlos Sainz has just done a purple first sector. Fernando Alonso has gone up to 7th place. As Zhou does another lap, but only goes 18th. So current order was 7.5 minutes to go in Q1. Norris, P1, and then Leclerc, Verstappen, Russell, Hamilton, Piastri, Alonso, Hulkenberg, Albon, Magnussen, and then Stroll 11th, Ricciardo 12th, Colapinto 13th, and then Tsunoda, Bottas, and in the drop zone, Perez, Ocon, Zhou, Gasly, Sainz. Sergio Perez did a very poor first run, as we saw, and he's got to improve. Currently in the pits. Here comes Carlos Sainz. And that's a good lap time, a 120.1, and that puts him up to 3rd. As Pierre Gasly goes 9th and Esteban Ocon, his teammate, goes 10th. Very good improvement there for Alpine. You would expect Alpine to have both cars knocked out in Q1, so if they can get any of their cars into Q2, that would be an accomplishment. As the drop zone, it's now Colapinto, Tsunoda, Bottas, Perez, Zhou. But yeah, to me, I'm expecting Zhou to be eliminated because he's an awful driver, and the 2 Alpines to be eliminated because that car just is awful for this track. So, I'd be very surprised if Gasly, Ocon, and Zhou, any of those 3, make it through to Q2. But I have to say, Colapinto and the Williams, I think he's had a decent run so far. He's only 0.02 of a second behind Ricciardo, and looking, well, more likely to get out of Q1 than Sargent did for 99% of his career. As looks like Colapinto, number 43, he is. Looks like he is about to be released onto the track for a final run. And thankfully, Colapinto does have experience at this track, of course, because every junior formula known to man races at Monza. So everyone has experience of Monza. And yeah, 5 minutes to go. So 2 Ferraris entering the pits. And we're now looking at Alex Albon in P12. And yeah, Williams should get at least 1 car into Q2. But if they can get both through, I think that would vindicate James Vowles' decision and shut up all the idiots on Twitter, or X, who still want to suck off Logan Sargent for being the worst driver on the grid. As here comes Alex Albon to start maybe his final run, or one of his final runs, of Q1. Last year, what a race he had here. I think qualified, what was it, 6th or 7th or something like that, and then finished in the race in 6th place, I think it was, ahead of the 2 McLarens who couldn't pass the bullet train that it was that day. That's how quick the Williams was in a straight line. Not quite as quick in the down the straights as it used to be, but they brought a big upgrade at Zandvoort and appeared at Zandvoort to be quite a bit quicker than they were before. So maybe Williams a bit more of a force in the second half of 2024. As Albon now flat out down to the parabolic. He's not improved his middle sector, which may be costly. Gets into the apex nicely. Now the run to the line. What's the lap time like for Albon? A 120.5. He goes up to 8th. I think he might just get through, but it's going to be close. It's going to be close. Because he's only, I think, 5.5 tenths or so ahead of his teammate, who is the quickest man in the drop zone. So, yeah, it's going to be close. As here's a replay of Max Verstappen leaving his garage and probably almost colliding with someone, I would imagine. And, oh, yeah, that was a clear unsafe release from McLaren there. And Max saying, fuck, mate, we almost crashed. And yeah, that was a clear unsafe release. That was lucky not to end in an accident. Lucky that Max was paying attention. Because, yeah, that could have ended up with Max losing his front wing. As here is Sergio Perez on probably his final Q1 run. And that was Piastri, who's been noted for an unsafe release. First sector for Perez hasn't improved. Not really that bad. Not improving the first sector. But middle sector is or has been improved. So can Perez improve? Surely on 19th place in the Red Bull. And he does, and he goes up to 9th place. We'll find out if that is enough to put Perez into Q2. As Colapinto has done the first sector of his final Q1 run. Hasn't improved, though. But again, if you don't do a personal best in the first sector, it's not the end of the world. It's about the second and third sector, and he's absolutely blown the second sector by going wide into the gravel at the end, or the exit of the second Lesmo, and he's going to keep pushing on, but the lap is blown. What a shame, because if he had not made a mistake there, I think Colapinto might have ended up in Q2. As Kevin Magnussen also making a mistake there. Everyone all over the place here at the end of Q1. As we're looking now at Kevin Magnussen, who runs wide in Parabolica, and Magnussen is just all over the place and now goes wide and into the gravel and dramatically slows down, causing a yellow flag. What the fuck is he doing? As Hulkenberg doesn't improve. Zhou Guanyu doesn't improve. And, well, now there's a green flag because Magnussen I don't know what Magnussen was doing. He just decided to slow down. Fucking up everyone else. What the hell were you doing, K-Mag? As Stroll there hasn't improved as he's in 15th. And that could be trouble for him because Ricciardo now coming into the Parabolica. There's no yellow flags for Ricciardo. As Tsunoda up to 15th. So Stroll is out in Q1. Can Ricciardo get his way through? Yes, he can. Up to 15th place. And Ricciardo is in to Q2 as Piastri up to 3rd. Here comes Verstappen, who did a purple middle sector, but he's slowed down right to the line so he doesn't waste a set of tyres. But there you go. That moment from Kevin Magnussen as Russell goes up to 5th ruined, really, what was going to be an exciting end to the session, as we now got Fernando Alonso coming to the Parabolica, but it's quite slow, so I don't think he's going to improve there. But yeah, Q1 over and done with. Let's go through the drivers that have made it through to the second part of qualifying. Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, Carlos Sainz, George Russell, Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Alex Albon, Sergio Perez, Fernando Alonso, Pierre Gasly, and Esteban Ocon. Great job by those two and Alpine. Nico Hulkenberg, Kevin Magnussen, and Daniel Ricciardo, and knocked out in Q1 Yuki Tsunoda, Lance Stroll, Franco Colapinto, Valtteri Bottas, and Zhou Guanyu. Let me just get things ready, of course, for Q2. Colapinto, obviously, made the mistake. A shame, but I think he could have got through. There. So the potential's there, just needs more experience. But of course, Q2 will be a 15-minute long session, which will be underway in a couple minutes' time. But yeah, Alpine, brilliant. Getting both cars into Q2. I did not see that happen. I don't think Alpine did, to be honest. And also, for the people in the chat that like to say Ricciardo's washed, out qualifying Tsunoda. Not by much, and I know it's only 15th there he was in Q1, but still, out qualifying Tsunoda. And he has been in these last few races, not every race, but there has been some races here and there where he has out qualified Tsunoda. So let's not pretend like Tsunoda is absolutely destroying the guy. And Nib in the chat even saying Ricciardo beat Yuki without the upgrade package. So, yeah. Ricciardo is not washed. He just isn't as good as he once was. But, yeah. Q2 will be underway in a couple minutes' time. I have to say, Sauber, what a pathetic team. They're too good to be too shit, but they're too shit to be good enough to actually, be good enough to actually, be in the top 10, score points and all that. But I don't get how they've finished 19th and 20th there. They've got the Ferrari power unit, the best power unit on the grid when it comes to raw power. But they're last. How bad is that car? God forbid it had a Renault power unit. But yeah, just embarrassing. But, of course, Audi will be taking over that operation pretty soon. And we hope that they'll be turning that team into at least a team of competence. As Colapinto on the radio apologising, but as, oh God, we dropped some frames there. Sorry about that. I mean, yeah, good to see him apologising, being, wary that he clearly made a mistake. But I think Williams, they will not be too bothered by that, because I think from the data, it will clearly show that Colapinto, I think already in that session, has shown more than Logan Sargent showed in 99% of the sessions he did. If Colapinto had not made that mistake, I think there's a good chance Colapinto would have ended up in Q2. So, yeah. And I think tomorrow in the race, I think we could see him probably climb a couple positions. As on Sky F1, they're just doing a replay of the unsafe release incident between Red Bull and McLaren. And yeah, it was a clear unsafe release. We'll see what the stewards have to say about that. And yeah, they're showing a replay of this Magnussen moment where he clearly just didn't, get the front end into the parabolica, the rear end snapped on him. And then he just slowed down and almost stopped in the parabolica. It's like, what are you doing? Absolute stupidity there from Magnussen. And luckily for him, he's in Q2. So he gets another chance, or another couple chances. But that was so weird what he did. Anyway. There is the second drop zone, as we have a small delay to the start of Q2 because the marshals are sweeping away gravel from the Lesmo 2 corner, which has been kicked up. But yeah, just a couple minute delay by the looks of it. And then we should get this session rolling again. As here's a replay of Tsunoda crossing the start-finish line and then saying Yeah, mate, it's just so ridiculous. It's so difficult to drive. It's so ridiculous. Obviously, talking about the car. And then they, I think, promptly told him, please shut the fuck up. As we're looking at Piastri in the garage. But, yeah, I hope Piastri, who did a better lap there at the end of Q1, I hope there was no damage done to the underneath of his McLaren when he went off at turn 1 and 2, because yeah, not been a great start to qualifying for Oscar, but there is still 2 more parts of qualifying, and if his car is fine, then should be able to build back the confidence for when it really matters. But yeah, I'll let you know when Q2 gets underway. Obviously, I'll sync up the timer at the 14-minute mark. For this session, the 2 Alpines, as we've just been notified that Q2 will start in 3 minutes' time. Yeah, the 2 Alpines should be eliminated in this session. I would be amazed if Alpine made it through to Q3. I really would. Ricciardo, I still think, has got a good chance of Q3. If he can just hook the lap up, then I still think it's possible for him. Magnussen always tends to disappoint in qualifying. So Magnussen, I think, will get eliminated. So yeah, Gasly, Ocon, and Magnussen, I think we can expect to be eliminated here. But, you know, will Ricciardo get eliminated? Will Alonso get eliminated? What about Alex Albon? And then obviously you got Hulkenberg. Hulkenberg didn't have a great first session there. Didn't quite live up to, I think, the potential of the Haas car. As we're looking at Fernando Alonso in the garage. Of course, Alonso has won here at Monza before. I think twice before. Once for McLaren and once for the Scuderia. But his last win here was 14 years ago, where he won ahead of Jenson Button and the other Ferrari of Felipe Massa. But after Q1, you got to say McLaren and Ferrari, I think, are looking pretty good so far. Norris and Leclerc both did 2 brilliant lap times in Q1 there. Norris a 19.9 and Leclerc a 120.0. Lap times that won't be far from the pole position time. So clearly they're confident. And as I said earlier, Leclerc has been, as of late, performing at his absolute best. So it's good to see that he's maintaining that level. And Lando Norris should be, at least, carrying confidence from last week. As we see the Mercedes there of Lewis Hamilton sat with no tyres. But the session has now begun. And the first 2 cars on the track look to be the 2 Ferraris. Sainz first, with Leclerc following on. And then the Alpine there just behind. But yeah, Ferrari, good start. Let's see if they can maintain that. If Ferrari can dip into the 1-minute 19s in this session, then I think that would, I wouldn't say set them up for pole position, but it would give them the confidence to go for it. If they can do like a, I don't know, like a 119.8 or something like that. So let's see what Ferrari will do. And of course, remember, big upgrade has been fitted to the Ferrari car. We're not going to find out fully whether, it's true effect here because of the nature of this circuit. But if they do take pole, then I think you could use that as evidence that Ferrari's upgrade has worked. But there is still a bit to go until we find out who will start tomorrow's race on pole. There is Théo Pourchaire, the academy driver for Sauber. He tweeted last night that he was travelling to Monza and everyone got excited, thinking that maybe he was going to replace Zhou. I was hoping that, but disappointingly, Zhou still in the car. I forgot to sync up the timer at the 14-minute mark. Sorry for that, but I will sync it up at the 13-minute mark, which is about to come up in a few seconds, as we watch Carlos Sainz start his Q2 lap. And there you go. 13 minutes to go in Q2. As the two Ferraris have done the two best? Or no, 8th and 9th best in the speed trap, which is a bit surprising. Would have expected them to be a bit higher. Not necessarily at the top, but at least one of them in the top 5. But bit of extra downforce, clearly, on this Ferrari car, as Carlos Sainz does a decent first sector. Quite a bit quicker than Leclerc, though. Couple tenths. Maybe Leclerc's made a mistake. Sainz does not go too wide at the second Lesmo like he did at the start of Q1. Luckily, there's a car ahead he can grab some slipstream from, Lando Norris. And, of course, purple in the middle sector. He's the first man to do a run in Q2. As Leclerc now does a purple middle sector. Ferrari, though, I think do tend to run old tyres for their first runs in Q2. So this might not be as quick as what we saw in Q1, as Carlos Sainz does a 120.3 and Leclerc goes quicker and does a 120.2, which again is slower than what they did in Q1. So clearly on older tyres, but still good lap time, 120.2 on older tyres. On newer tyres, I think they could probably dip into the 119s. Again, remember, pole position should be anywhere between a 119.5 and a 19.7 or a 19.8. As Kevin Magnussen goes up to 3rd position. Hulkenberg now goes up to 3rd. As Max Verstappen on a lap here, but it's not lighting up the timesheets, unfortunately. No purple sectors as he comes to the finish line now. What's the lap time like? It's an amazing final sector, and he does a 1:19.8. Statement made, but then another statement made by Oscar Piastri, who goes nearly a tenth of a second quicker. Here comes Lando Norris. Can he go quickest? Yes, he does, a 1:19.7. McLaren showing they have got very good pace, but Max Verstappen of the Red Bull also showing that Red Bull are still there to fight for pole. They're not that far away, only a tenth and a half off Lando Norris there. So Norris quickest, Piastri second, and then Verstappen, Leclerc, Sainz, Perez, Hulkenberg, Magnussen, Gasly, and Ocon is your top 10. The two Mercedes are on outlaps, and so is Alonso. Alex Albon is on a time lap now, so that's why the two Alpines are in the top 10. But yeah, McLaren are standing up when it's are standing up to the fight so far. But I would like to see, it's the two Ferraris already on outlaps. Very interested to see now on fresh tyres how quick Ferrari can go. I think Leclerc might be able to match, if not go quicker than Verstappen, but I'm not sure if Leclerc can go faster than the McLarens. I think that would be quite incredible. As Alexander Albon gets a beautiful slipstream down to the Parabolica. And this might put him in the top 10. Doesn't quite hook up with the apex, but that's okay. Good exit from the Parabolica to the line. And he goes 8th. 8th place for Albon. And if Albon can get in the top 10, really, that would be a great qualifying for him. As Russell exiting the Ascari chicane, but he's not going very quick. Lewis Hamilton is, though, only 0.02 of a second slower than Norris after the first 2 sectors. George Russell, though, going quite a bit slower. Let's see what his lap time is. He goes 4th, only a 1/10 down on Norris. Lewis Hamilton is going to be soon coming to line. Here he is. And he goes quickest to 1:19.6. What a time from Hamilton. And Mercedes clearly showing there they have got the pace for pole position. Russell, a bit further back, surprisingly, in 5th, but only a 1/4 second away. As Alonso is in 11th place. Carlos Sainz on fresh tyres done a purple first sector. Ferrari now showing their hand before the shootout. Carlos, though, is pretty quick in this first sector. Leclerc, though, seems to be quicker in the rest of the lap. Sainz, only a couple hundredths slower than Hamilton. After the first 2 sectors, what's Leclerc doing? Bit slower. About a 1/10 of a second slower than Sainz. But this is good pace from Ferrari. This is pole position pace. As Carlos Sainz exits the Parabolica, comes to the line. Can he go up to first? No, he can't, but he's only a 1/10 down. Ferrari proving right there they have got the pace to fight for pole. Leclerc. Bad final sector, and he stays in 7th place. But, I mean, that lap time should be good enough to get him through to Q3. But, yeah, Ferrari, they've got the pace to fight for pole. But whether they've got the best car is another story. It looks to be, as I said coming into qualifying, that Mercedes, overall for the entire lap, seem to have the advantage over McLaren and Ferrari and Red Bull. So, looking good for the Silver Arrows. And remember, Mercedes have not won here for 6 years, as Leclerc saying on the radio, the car is not turning at all again, so not happy with the balance there. But 5.5 minutes to go in Q2, and it is Hamilton P1 on a 1:19.6, very good lap time. Then Norris 2nd, Sainz 3rd, Piastri 4th, and then Verstappen, Russell, Leclerc, Perez, Hülkenberg, and Albon. And in the drop zone, Alonso, Magnussen, Gasly, Ocon, Ricciardo. Ricciardo, very slow lap he did. First lap he did in Q2. I'm hoping that lap was on old tyres, because, yeah, 0.8 of a second away from the time that Albon has done in 10th. So either a mistake made or, like I said, on very old tyres. But Lewis Hamilton, 1:19.6. He's been very quick this weekend, Hamilton. The reason I didn't predict him to get pole for Mercedes was because, well, this season Hamilton has been mostly disappointing. But maybe this is one of those days where Hamilton is absolutely on it. And yeah, 4 years ago, in a very quick Mercedes car, of course, Lewis Hamilton took pole for Mercedes. And Hamilton is the last driver for McLaren to take pole position at Monza back in 2012. As we are looking at the two Alpines. Who are preparing for their final run of Q2. It would be a miracle if they got through. If they can get 11th or 12th, though, I think that would be a very, very good effort. As Alpine are improving with their car, but this is obviously just a circuit that does not suit their car whatsoever, as we've seen for the past couple years. As Ocon is going slow and looks like is he providing a tow to Gasly, or they're both going slow? So they're doing an extra warm-up lap. They want to make sure they definitely get a slipstream by the looks of it. Kevin Magnussen says, fuck that, I'm off on a qualifying lap, and begins his final attempt at getting through to Q3. Kevin Magnussen has never really had that many great qualifying sessions here at Monza. His first one in 2014 was great, as Hülkenberg has done a purple first sector. Magnussen qualified 5th here in 2014. And at the start of the race, he actually got up to, I think, 2nd place and then dramatically fell away as the race went on. As Magnussen has not improved his middle sector either. And looks like Magnussen is going to stay in 12th place. Maybe if he's got enough fuel in the tank, he can grab a slipstream for another lap from the cars behind. But if not, then this is all it is for Magnussen. And yeah, hasn't improved. Nico Hülkenberg's teammate, though, I thought, well, he's improved his lap time, but final sector really lacking. And stays in 9th place. Here comes Sergio Perez in 8th. Can he secure another Q3 appearance for the 3rd race in a row? Here comes Perez. Improves his lap time, stays in 8th. That should be okay. As Verstappen does a 1:19.6 and goes up to 2nd. Only a couple hundredths slower than Hamilton, as Ricciardo improves, but only goes 11th. He has missed out on Q3, but a valiant effort nonetheless. As Alex Albon here on a final lap, he's still in P10, Albon. As Alonso in 12th has not improved his first sector. And Albon for the lap so far, only a quarter of a second slower than Hamilton. If he can have a good final sector, I think Albon might be able to go 7th or 8th. With this lap. As Albon, brilliant through the parabolica and up to the line. Can he get into Q3? He goes up to 9th. Will that be enough? I think it probably is enough. Here comes Fernando Alonso. He goes up to 11th, misses out on Q3 by 0.010 of a second. Here's Esteban Ocon, who stays in 15th, and Pierre Gasly has ended up in 14th. So not a great end there to Q2, but Q2 over and done with, and let's go through the drivers that have made it through to the final part of qualifying, the shootout at Monza. Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez, Alex Albon, what a job by him, and Nico Hülkenberg. But knocked out in Q2, Fernando Alonso, Daniel Ricciardo, Kevin Magnussen, Pierre Gasly, and Esteban Ocon. As George Russell there was still on a lap, but wasn't improving any of his sectors. But at least get some practice in for Q3. Mercedes haven't had pole since Silverstone, where they locked out the front row. Not sure they can lock out the front row here, but pole position definitely is possible. As Alonso, surely sarcastically on the radio, says, I think P11 is better than expected. I don't think he cares anymore at this point. Does the old Spaniard. But yeah, Q3 will be underway in about 3 or 4 minutes from now. And this is going to be a brilliant Q3. We have got 4 separate teams who can take pole. Mercedes, Red Bull, McLaren, and Ferrari. This is what we've been praying for, guys, and we have it. Let's just hope we don't get an anticlimactic ending, which we have had here before at Monza. Remember the poll running in the chat? That will keep running probably for another 5 minutes, and then I'll finish up the poll and go through the results. So yeah, make sure to let me know who you think is going to take pole here. I think, given Hamilton's pace, I'd probably have to say Lewis Hamilton. I still, I'm going to stick with Mercedes, but just change my my driver there. But yeah, Mercedes looking really good. McLaren still looking good as well. And even though Verstappen went up to second, that was an extra run he did compared to the others. So, an advantage there for Max. But yeah, I'll let you know when Q3 gets underway. Of course, another thing, or potentially great thing, is what if Ferrari end up on pole yet again, 3rd year in a row? Gonna take, like I said before qualifying, it's gonna take some effort for that to happen, but it's possible. It is possible. As Sky F1, I think now we're just gonna do some analysis of what's happened so far. As Ricardo saying on the radio, yeah, honestly, that was about all I had. Well, I mean, I predicted him to qualify 9th and get into the top 10. Obviously, didn't do that. But 12th place, out qualifying his teammate. I mean, 12th place is not that bad. He easily could still finish in the points tomorrow. So, it's not the end of the world for Ricardo. We know that racing bulls do tend to be pretty good over a race distance. So, yeah, don't be too alarmed if you are a fan of racing bulls or Danny Rick. But yeah, cannot wait for this Q3. And with Mercedes looking as good as they are, we do have to remember when, we talk about the championship and the fight between Red Bull and McLaren, and as what is it? Race Control just said Q3 is going to start in 3 minutes time. We talk about the championship battle between Red Bull and McLaren, or Max and Lando, which is, great in that. But one team that has a big say in where the championship is going to end up is Mercedes-Benz. Because I mean, if you look since that Austrian Grand Prix where they took their first win of the year, Mercedes have been the most one of the most informed teams. They won, one in Austria, one at Silverstone, one at Spa. Didn't have a good Dutch Grand Prix, but I think that was a one-off, really. And they are going to have a say, absolutely, in who wins this championship, whether it's on the constructors or the driver's side, because they are a factor. And if Ferrari, with this upgrade they brought, if it does help improve them, they'll also become, like Mercedes, a clear factor in where the championship ends up. So, yeah, we will see. But yeah, Q3 underway in just a couple minutes time. Nicholas says, "Come on, Charles, please don't let us Ferrari fans down. Get that pole." I think he'll do a good lap in Q3. He looked good in Q1. There's no reason why he can't pull out a lap here in Q3. Grandmaster Yoda says Lando on pole. G Walker says predicting Max will nail the pole. Yeah, I'd say there's probably 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 5 drivers here who could get pole position. And that's exactly how we want it. But in Q2, it was Hamilton and Verstappen at the very top. As Q3 underway, I think, in the next few seconds. I will get the timer on screen when we get to the 11-minute mark of Q3. But yeah, I think given that they did a 1:19.6 at best as the Red Bulls come out and a Williams comes out and the McLarens as well, given that the best lap time in Q2 was a 1:19.6, I think you're going to have, if you want to absolutely solidify pole position, I think you're going to have to probably do like a 1:19.3 to absolutely nail down pole position. Because even if you do a 19.4 or 19.5 in your first or second, that isn't necessarily going to be good enough to end up on pole or on the front row. Because it is that close. So yeah, 1:19.3. If anyone can do that or better, then I think pole position is theirs, whoever does it. But Q3 has begun, and we are now at the 11-minute mark. 11 minutes remain in qualifying. Grandmaster Yoda says, "How are you forgetting Max will have a penalty down the line? Max barely have any hope at the title this year." Well, he's 70 points clear, so you can't say he has barely any hope. That's just ridiculous. And I don't know of future penalties that Max is supposed to have. He took a penalty at Spa, but I don't know about any future penalties, so I don't really know what you're talking about there. Yanni says they think it'll be Max, Piastri, Russell. I've finished up the results in the poll, and 260 votes, and you guys voted on the poll where I've asked you who will take pole position today at Monza. 39% of you voted for Lewis Hamilton. 30% went for Max Verstappen, 25% for Lando Norris, and 5% for Oscar Piastri. As Carlos Sainz has been noted for an unsafe release as well, which I don't think we saw. But here is the McLaren. We don't want to be looking at Zach Brown, please, Mr. TV Director. We want to be looking at the Australian Oscar Piastri, who's flying down to turn 1 and begins his first attempt at pole position at Monza. Remember, Piastri has not had a pole position in his career. Had a pole for a sprint race, but that doesn't count. And the first sector is good, but the rest of the lap will tell us more. As Lando Norris has begun his first attempt at pole, and he's a bit further back on this lap, and he has gone slightly quicker in sector 1. As Piastri, DRS wide open, down now to the Ascari chicane. And good middle sector, touches the grass on the entry to the Ascari chicane, but it doesn't look like it affected him at all, which is great to see, as Hülkenberg, I think, has done the first lap time of Q3, and now Perez has, I think. But here comes Piastri. What is the lap time to begin with? It is a 1:19.4. That is very good, but is it good enough? Here comes his teammate Lando Norris. And he goes slightly quicker, 0.03 of a second quicker, and Lando Norris is just about on provisional pole for now. Carlos Sainz, 0.3 slower, goes third. Verstappen, 5th behind his teammate. Leclerc goes 4th. Not a great effort by him either. Now we wait for the 2 Mercedes drivers who have not done a purple sector as of yet. And here comes George Russell out of the parabolica to the line. And a 1:19.5 puts him 3rd. And Hamilton a 19.6, he goes 4th. So it is, after the first runs, with 7 minutes to go in qualifying, it is McLaren locking out the front row with only 0.035 of a second separating Norris and Piastri. So Norris on provisional pole with Piastri 2nd, Russell 3rd, only a 10.5 back, Hamilton 4th, and exactly 0.2 of a second away from Norris. Sainz 5th, exactly 0.3 of a second away from Norris. Leclerc only 0.003 slower than his teammate in 6th. Perez 7th and Verstappen 8th. What on earth happened on that lap for Max Verstappen? Max says on the radio, I had no fucking grip at all on this set. Shocking. Well, at least he has one final attempt left. Hülkenberg 9th and Albon in 10th. But to me, the fight for pole looks to be going into this final run between the 2 McLaren and 2 Mercedes drivers. I don't think Ferrari or Red Bull can get pole here. I think they're just a bit too far back, as is a replay of Max on his lap, turning into parabolica, rear end snapping. He holds it, but that would have cost him a 10th or 2. And Max has had trouble at parabolica all weekend. That Red Bull car just isn't working for him anymore. But yeah, it's McLaren versus Mercedes in the fight for pole with 1 run to go. And like I said before the final, before we got into Q3, I thought a 1:19.3 I thought would be enough to stave off the competitors, and it might still be enough on this final run, but you may have to do a 1:19.2. It's just ridiculously close. But I think for really the top 4, Norris, Piastri, Russell, Hamilton, the only ones I think can fight for pole here, as long as on their final lap they improve in all the sectors, that's what matters. If they can do that, then wherever they end up is the best they can do. But what you don't want to be doing is having you know, say a good sector 1, a good sector 2, and then you bottle it at the Parabolica. Because if that happens, then you're going to be miserable. Yeah, 3 or just under 4 minutes remain as Max Verstappen, your world champion, not sure for how much longer, and his teammate Sergio Perez look like they're going to be the first cars on the track. As the third car there will be Nico Hülkenberg. But Max can definitely do better. But I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not sure that Max can even get in the top 5 here. Red Bull are legitimately slow. So, yeah. This could end up being a horror show qualifying for Red Bull, legitimately. If Max can get in the top 4, I would be amazed at this point. As we're looking here at the Ferrari there, I think of Leclerc leaving the pits. The last 2 cars to leave the pits will be the Mercedes drivers. Of course, they were the last 2 to finish their first laps. And if you can get a slipstream at the right time, then around here especially, it can make the difference between a pole position or maybe even, a 4th or a 5th place. As we look at Max Verstappen entering the straight down to the Parabolica. This has never really been a great place qualifying-wise for Max, but he's going to have to do his best here and drag that Red Bull somehow into a good position to help their race tomorrow. DRS Open, Max begins his final lap of qualifying. And down to the first chicane he comes. And car absolutely fine through the first chicane, no issues at all. As Verstappen powers up to the first sector point. And it's not a personal best, but it's still a good first sector. As Perez, Hülkenberg and Albon also have started their final qualifying run. As someone ahead, I think it might have been Perez, has kicked up a load of gravel from the second Lesmo. See if that affects any other drivers. But Verstappen hasn't improved his middle sector either. He made a big mistake in the Parabolica, so he still may improve his lap, but I'm not sure this is even going to get him onto the third row of the grid. As Lando Norris has not improved his first sector. As Perez gets out of the way for his teammate, so clearly Perez can't improve. As Mercedes are going to get a nice slipstream for Verstappen now as he finishes his lap. And Verstappen only goes 7th. A disaster for Red Bull. 7th and 8th. Lando Norris, purple middle sector. As Hülkenberg improves and stays 9th. Carlos Sainz, though, has done a purple first sector. Piastri hasn't improved in the middle sector as Alex Albon goes up to 9th. Great effort by him. As Carlos Sainz, brilliant middle sector. Ferrari might end up getting pole here for the 3rd year in a row as Lando Norris comes to the line and does a 1:19.3. Is that going to be good enough as Piastri comes to the line? And he doesn't improve. That might be costly. Carlos Sainz goes up to 3rd. Charles Leclerc, he goes 3rd. So it's 3rd and 4th at the minute for Ferrari. Mercedes not going quick enough, I don't think, for pole. Russell has not improved his middle sector. And Hamilton not improved his first sector. But it's still close. As into Parabolica, Russell goes. Doesn't quite get into the apex. Not as good as he would have hoped. But he comes to the line nonetheless. And George Russell goes third. Lewis Hamilton just behind. Stays in sixth. So McLaren, despite us all thinking that this was going to be a weak race, they have gone and locked out the front row at Monza. Lando Norris, for the second week running, is on pole position. Oscar Piastri second, George Russell third, Leclerc fourth, Sainz fifth, Hamilton sixth, Max Verstappen seventh, and Lando Norris, if he can win tomorrow and Max finishes around there, Lando and McLaren will be super confident of winning the championship this year. Perez 8th, Albon 9th, Hulkenberg 10th, and then the rest of the field, Alonso 11th, Ricciardo 12th, Magnussen 13th, Gasly 14th, Ocon 15th, Tsunoda 16th, Stroll 17th, Colapinto 18th, Bottas 19th, and Zhou Guanyu in 20th. So there you go, guys. That is qualifying over and done with. I am going to stick around for a few minutes because I want to ask you guys, who do you think is driver of the day for qualifying at Monza? And there's not an obvious choice for driver of the day, but Lando Norris, I'll put up there. Obviously because he's on pole. Leclerc, I'll put up there. I'll put Piastri in there. I mean, he still performed well, even though he ended up second to his teammate. And Alex Albon, I'll put in there as well. But my driver of the day, I am going to go Lando Norris because he was out of those top four in the, after the first lap, out of the two McLaren and two Mercedes drivers, he was the one who produced the best lap. He delivered that 1:19.3, which I said should be enough to cover everyone else off, and it was. So, yeah, Lando Norris, I would say, driver of the day. But, even though Lando has had a few pole positions now, he has never held the lead into the first corner when starting from pole. And if he has a bad start tomorrow, remember, it is a long run down to that first chicane. So, if he has a bad start like he had last week at Zandvoort, he might end up not only second, but maybe even third or fourth. So, just because Lando's on pole, as we know, does not mean he's going to win. Because those starts are still really affecting him. And until he gets on top of it, it's going to be an issue. And if Piastri does get into the lead tomorrow, and Lando does drop back to like third or fourth place, then Piastri becomes the clear favourite to win the race tomorrow. So, if I'm Oscar Piastri or a fan of his, I'd be pretty happy with what's happened here, given Lando's record at starting races. So, if you're a Piastri fan, tomorrow might be yet another race win for the young Australian. But like I said, I will stick around for a couple minutes after qualifying has just finished, just to read out a couple of your comments. Elaine Wade says, Hamilton, very disappointing. This is why I predict Hamilton in my predictions to not do that well in qualifying, because most of this season, he just doesn't produce in qualifying. He just doesn't produce the goods. He's... I don't know if he's lost that ability he had in qualifying to consistently deliver big laps, or if it's just, something with the car he doesn't like. I don't know what it is, but he continuously disappoints in qualifying. G Walker says Albon, drive for the day. Crystal Racing says Russell and Albon. Todd says I'll give it to Sargent. Yanni says there's a 90% chance that Piastri will be first after the first corner. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Piastri was first into the first corner. But we have to remember with Lando, eventually he will, maintain the lead into the first corner eventually. It might be tomorrow. It might be in a few races from now. Who knows? Eventually, that record is going to be broken. So, yeah, we'll see. But remember, guys, tomorrow, of course, I will be back here live for the race with my co-commentator, Nib, who I'm sure cannot wait for when those 5 lights go out tomorrow at 2 p.m. UK time. But I will be live, of course, 2 hours before the race starts at 12 p.m. UK time to go through the usual build-up, the data from qualifying, and go through the race pace data from Friday to see whose race pace is looking good and who to look out for in the Italian Grand Prix. And yeah, it should be fun. It really should be fun. I don't think it's going to be a boring race, especially if Lando loses the lead in turn 1. But yeah, it's going to be it's going to be a fun race tomorrow. And of course, if there is no safety car, it'll be the fastest race of the year. Astro says, what's the deal with Lando Norris and terrible race starts? Thoughts, please, Chazza? Well, he said after the Dutch Grand Prix that he gets incredibly nervous before a race. So I think it's that. It's just nerves. I think he's probably one of those people that like deliberately taps their leg or, can't stop moving their body because of the nerves. And probably when he lines up there on pole and the lights come on, just freezes because of the nerves. But as we saw at Zandvoort, once he got over the nerves and the whole, oh, for fuck's sake, I lost the lead, he was fine. So, but obviously that's not a good trait to have because, constantly losing key position at the start of a race, those are the things that cost you championships. Astra says, Ferrari disappointing today. I thought they may have come up with something special here. I mean, I predicted them to qualify, 5th and 7th. So, I mean, they did better than I expected. But I think 4th and 5th, honestly, is, if you look at the weekend we've had and where teams have been, that's where they've looked to be. That I don't think they've been a front row looking team. So yeah, they don't have that pace. But again, with this upgrade they brought, let's not come to conclusions just yet. Yanni says, I thought the RB20 looked like shit when I first saw it. Even while it was winning, the RB20 was supposed to be evolutionary, but it looked more revolutionary. Well, obviously at the start of the season it was supremely quick, but the reason Red Bull season has fallen apart is obviously what's gone off the track has absolutely had an effect on the Red Bull team. And, what's happened on track in terms of the pace of the car. But the key moment was in May, where McLaren brought that upgrade in Miami, which massively improved their pace. They were still slower probably at that point than Red Bull by maybe a tenth or so. But at the same time, Red Bull brought an upgrade, I think a couple of weeks later at Imola, that didn't work and has upset the balance of the car and has put the balance of a car in a position where Max doesn't like it. So they need to figure out what was working and get back to what was working. I know it sounds simple, but I mean, that's what they need to do. Because this car they've got it's just not to Max's liking. Always looking forward to Monza tomorrow. Great race. Thanks, Chazza. No problem. And Astro saying, cheers, Chaz. No probs. And yeah, I think those are probably all the comments that I'll read out. But even though there's only been 17 votes in the Driver of the Day poll, it's clear who's won the poll. Let me read out the results. Lando Norris, 47% of the vote. Albon second, 23%, and then Piastri in third, 17%, and then Leclerc fourth on 11%. But like I said, guys, make sure to join me tomorrow, 2 hours before the race starts at 12 p.m. UK time for the 2024 Italian Grand Prix race watch-along, where I'll be joined by my co-commentator Nib, and we will take you through what could be a very exciting last European race of the season. Make sure to come along and hopefully enjoy the Italian Grand Prix with us. And yeah, would be great to have you. Thanks for coming along today, of course, for qualifying, which of course has been very exciting. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Make sure, if you are new to the channel, of course, to subscribe and smash the like button for more content like this. And don't forget as well to join the Discord server. Link, I think, below in the description for that. But guys, until tomorrow at 12 p.m. UK time for the start of my race watch along covering the 2024 edition of the Italian Grand Prix, it's been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.